631. Lazarus dragged his finger across the water, the statues around him starting to move with his movement, forming a single line on each side of him. Anas stared at the scene with a baffled expression. He looked at a complete loss. Lazarus merely gave him a cursory glance before smiling. He was rather satisfied at this very moment. This sort of power is not bad. His mind felt extremely clear, and looking around, he could see red threads connected to each of the statues before him. That wasn't all, he could also notice the threads stretch beyond the area he was in, and towards different areas. As if everything was connected to his mind, he could perceive everything. With just a single thought, he could see what his other connections were seeing, and at this very moment, it was as if the entire city was under his eyes. This sort of power, it's incredible, but at the same time, it was also extremely draining to his mind. Just connecting to one point made his head throb. The back of his head also hurt. There's not much time to waste, human. I can feel something sinister starting to build not far from here. If we don't hurry now, I'm afraid we might be too late. Single quote. All right, Lazarus snapped out of his drunken state and quickly sobered up. Closing his eyes, several thousand red dots appeared in his mind. He expanded them individually, displaying different areas of the city. Eventually, his gaze settled on a tall and imposing structure. Constructed from dark stone and rising from the very heart of the city, the structure was encased in a crimson coral, which clung to it from all sides as if trying to pierce its surface. The result was a haunting, almost sinister appearance. That coral, it belongs to none other than the hive monster. I presume that's the structure I need to go to. That's correct. Okay. Lazarus didn't waste time and expanded even more visions. He saw through the entire structure of the city. That was also when he noticed several abnormalities in certain areas. I can detect several powerful monsters lurking here. I should probably take this path. An ideal path appeared in Lazarus's mind shortly after. By taking into account the monsters that were secretly lurking around, and looking at the fastest route that he could take without alerting them, he soon opened his eyes again and took a step forward. At the same time, he nudged Anas with his head, who followed him after a brief moment of hesitation. Lazarus could feel from his gaze that he was doubting something, but he paid Anas no mind. He couldn't be bothered to explain since he couldn't talk. Thankfully, the journey to the large pyramid-like structure was fairly easy. In just a matter of minutes, they managed to arrive before the structure, as Lazarus saw for the first time just how big the structure was. The structure was extremely imposing, and when he turned his head, he could see the reverence in Anas' gaze as he looked at the place. That was when something clicked in Lazarus's mind. Could this place be related to the goddess of light? He had only ever seen Anas make such expressions whenever he dealt with something that was related to that goddess. Lazarus's curiosity deepened as he gazed at the structure, his eyes inevitably drawn to the large opening that led inside. There was something unsettling about it. The way the darkness within seemed to consume every trace of light, as if the entrance itself were alive and waiting, made it especially unsettling. This is the point where you must exert caution. I had tried multiple times to enter this place, but without any success. The only thing I could do was try to break the entire structure, but even that is not good enough. I can see. Lazarus looked at all the numerous corals that were attached to the pyramid. If that didn't make it clear, then he didn't know what would. He proceeded forward shortly after, allowing for the darkness to swallow him. Anas followed him shortly after. Of course, Lazarus also brought several statues with him. He was sure they'd be handy further down the line. Anas didn't look very averse to entering the structure. And it soon became very clear why, as the corals in their necks pulsed with a faint red light, illuminating the surroundings as a large tunnel appeared in their vision. A couple of steps into the place, large murals and engravings appeared on the side of the walls. The most eye-catching mural was that of a young woman in white and long yellow hair standing before a large crowd of people, their hands stretched in her direction as they revered her. She looked holy, pure in the mural. And as Lazarus turned his head, he could see Anas staring at the picture with a similar expression. Something about this doesn't feel right. Lazarus was well aware of these gods. He knew that they weren't really gods. They were merely people who had been granted powers that no normal human should have ever come into contact with. The thing that made him curious, however, was the reason why they chose to allow people to revere them as gods. At first, Lazarus assumed it was because of their deeds, but it now appeared to be deeper than that. The gods, they were trying to get the people to revere them. But why? Why would they try to do that? Would he be able to find a reason within this strange structure? And was the series of events perhaps connected with that? Lazarus's eyes sharpened as he moved forward, the pulse around him growing dimmer and dimmer. At the same time, he activated Lament of Lies and masked his presence, alongside that of Anaz. The deeper he went into the corridor, the colder the water became, and as his steps started to slow down, he noticed a faint opening in the distance. Lazarus didn't move in immediately. He instead controlled one of the statues behind him and urged them forward, his mind connecting to the coral attached to the statue, granting him a vision of what was happening. The statue gradually moved towards the opening. In order not to attract much attention, Lazarus made sure to dim the light coming from the coral attached to the statue, and eventually, moving past the opening, a large empty hall appeared. The world was silent as the surroundings appeared dark, with the faint outlines of a large statue in the distance, and several long rows of benches lined up to face the statue that most likely depicted the goddess of light. This must be where they used to pray. Lazarus more or less had an idea of what this area represented. Looking at how empty it was, his mind started to relax, but then, "Someone is watching." The monster's voice echoed in his mind, and his entire body tensed as he flicked the head of the statue to look around. Watching. Who was? And then he saw it. The numerous silhouettes that sat by the benches, all staring in the direction of the statues. Gradually, their heads turned to display hollow and empty eyes, and Lazarus felt his heart skip a beat. Quote! Exclamation mark quote. He lost connection right after that. It all happened so fast that he hardly had any time to react. By the time he realized what had happened, a sharp pain invaded his mind as his face changed subtly. He held on to the pain before calming down. What happened? The same thing that happened to me every time I tried to enter the place. It appears as though they have some sort of way to completely sever my connection with my bodies. I got that, but who are they? Who exactly is doing this? Humans. Humans. Lazarus thought back to what he had witnessed just a moment prior and shook his head. That's not possible. The things that he saw, they looked anything but human. They were humans who are now dead but have taken over the bodies of humans. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Lazarus was at a complete loss. Your companion over here should have a good idea. You can try asking him. Lazarus slowly turned his attention towards Anaz, who was looking at the murals around with a certain glint in his eyes. Thinking about the monster's words, a thought crossed Lazarus's mind, and his face twitched. Why didn't he think about it before? The coral attached to Anaz's body pulsed faintly, and Lazarus spoke. I need your help. Anaz's head flicked around, completely caught off guard by Lazarus's words before finally settling his gaze towards him. Wait, you can speak. Single quote. Yes, but that's not important right now. I need your help in figuring something out. Lazarus closed his eyes and followed the thread that connected to Anaz's coral before pressing his finger forward, right into his forehead. Wow! Anaz's eyes opened slightly at the unexpected action, but soon enough, a memory floated in his mind, and his expression quickly changed. Lazarus watched as Anaz's face slowly turned completely pale as he took a step back, a certain fear latched onto his face when he stared in the direction of where the situation had occurred. We have to leave, he said, his voice strained. Lazarus frowned upon hearing Anaz's words. Why? I understand what is going on. We have to leave immediately. Lazarus's frown deepened, staring at Anaz with a pensive expression. He could see from the clear fear in his eyes that he knew what was going on the side. Tell me exactly why you're acting like this. Anaz looked towards the opening, his step moving back. Those things. They are not things that we should get involved with. They are hollows. Hollows. Lazarus's brow raised. He had a vague understanding of what a hollowed was. They were the bodies that had been taken over by the voices. And if those were truly hollowed, then this is bad. His gaze turned away from the opening in the distance, but just as he did, his movement stopped as he felt something from above him. He froze, slowly turning his head to look up. A pair of white eyes met his gaze. 632. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. A pair of white eyes glowed within the darkness. As the coral embedded in their necks pulsed with a faint red glow, the white eyes came into focus, part of a twisted silhouette hanging just above. A person, their body contorted and mangled, was fused to the ceiling of the corridor, limbs bent at different and unnatural angles. Crap! Anaz was the first one to move as he hastily moved back, pushing his back towards the entrance of the temple. His figure was fast as he moved, covering several meters at once. Wait, there's no need to panic just yet. Lazarus's voice brought Anaz out of his panic. It was only then that he stopped and realized that the body was not moving. Come and take a closer look. Lazarus pointed at the body above. The body isn't one of those hollowed. No, maybe it is, but it looks like it had fought someone beforehand and the result was it getting smashed towards the top of the tunnel. Oh, you're right. Anas felt a little embarrassed once he saw that this was indeed the case. He had been so on edge when discovering the hollow that he had instantly panicked when he saw the pair of white eyes. As his mind sobered up, he began to closely analyze the situation, and soon, a thought crossed his mind. Do you think this was done by the two captains? Yes, it's most likely them. Lazarus replied calmly. Taking a look at how one-sided the fight appeared to be, this was the only reasonable assumption he could make. Only they would be able to do something like this, and taking a look to see how fresh the wounds were, he could tell that the fight had happened not too long ago. The only thing that made him confused was the hollowed at the opening, not far from where the two were. Did the two captains not fight those? His brows furrowed as he began to think about the situation. But right as he did, the entire building rumbled. Rumble, rumble, what's going on? Anas and Lazarus both looked around, their expressions changing as they felt the rumbling coming from deep within the temple. That was soon followed by a series of terrifying presences as the ground beneath them started to crack. The situation quickly became obvious to them. A fight is happening below. Did the two captains figure out the ones responsible for this? As Anas questioned, Lazarus didn't answer but kept his gaze directed down. He flicked his hand and made several statues charge ahead, as the hall from before came into his view. From the familiar hall, he caught sight of several hollowed slipping into a chamber beyond the statue of the goddess. They were going away. Let's go. He shared the vision with Anas and charged ahead, following the hollowed from behind. Rumble. The rumbling persisted, growing more pronounced as the very foundations of the pyramids started to shake. If this persisted like this, then it wouldn't be long before the entire pyramid crumbled. They didn't have much time. Lazarus sped up his movement while Anas followed from behind. The two slipped past the statue and entered the chamber, where a long flight of stairs came into view, descending into the depths below. Lazarus flicked his hand, and the remaining statues he had brought moved down, providing an extra eye for the two of them. Rumble. The deeper they descended, the more intense the rumbling grew, echoing through the stone around them. The rumbling added to the silence around them as they moved with caution, letting the statues survey their path ahead. There. Spotting something, Anas' expression changed subtly. Lazarus noticed it too, his steps slowing as his eyes narrowed. Ahead, the faint amber light marked the outline of an opening. From within, an overwhelming pressure emanated, multiple powerful presences stirring in the dark. The two exchanged a glance, tension crackling between them. Single quote. Should we go in? Maybe you might be able to do something, but at my current strength, I might just become a burden. That's fine. Lazarus's eyes narrowed as he looked at the opening. He also thought about just leaving and letting the two lords handle the situation. Furthermore, he could also tell that the current commotion was sure to attract the attention of those from within the temple. But at the same time, he also understood that there was a very good chance that this was a trap. The clue was obvious. Suddenly and out of nowhere, one of the victims from the mysterious flyers comes to them and jumps down into the water. Sure, there was a chance that it was indeed some sick coincidence. However, Lazarus didn't think so. He also felt that the same was true for the two captains. Whatever was causing this was trying to lure them deep within the temple to do something. At this point, they had no other option but to enter the opening and see what the situation was. Waving his hand, Lazarus activated Lament of Lies. Their figures blended with their surroundings, and the two began to move ahead. Another reason why he had to move forward was because of the hive monster. Lazarus was a lot more confident in handling any situation with it attached to his body. The more he engaged with the power it offered, the more boundless the possibilities seemed. He even felt his control over emotive magic starting to improve. He started to understand things that he didn't understand before. This was what he had been searching for the entire time. He wanted to bask in the feeling for longer. Rumble. As the surroundings shook again, Lazarus and Anas moved towards the light, their steps as light as possible. As they stepped through the amber glow, a vast cavern stretched open before them. At its far end loomed a towering altar, suspended above a void of inky black light. Lazarus's gaze was drawn to it, compelled, almost, as if the altar itself were reaching out, trying to lure him in. His hand reached forward, almost as if he was trying to grasp it. But then, snap out of it, The hive monster's voice snapped him out of it as cold sweat trickled down the side of his face. Lazarus then hastily looked at Anaz but was shocked to see him doing fine. Why? Lazarus tried to ask, but his eyes once again were drawn towards the altar. That was when he spotted the several dozen figures that flanked the altar. The figures all donned black hoodies, hiding their figures, but what they couldn't hide was the skinny frame of their pale hands as black veins lingered on the surface of the skin. Not far from it, the two spotted the captains, locked in a fierce fight with several dozen such figures. Bang, bang, the surroundings shook, and the water rippled. Their clash was fierce, threatening to make everything collapse at any given second. This is bad. Anaz came to the same observation that Lazarus had. With just one look, they could see the two captains were in a disadvantageous situation. This alone felt shocking when taking into consideration their status as overlords of the seas. For them to be pushed this far, it really did seem like they were up against extremely powerful opponents. Lazarus's eyes narrowed as he looked around. He was trying to see if there was some sort of leader, but as he looked, he didn't spot anyone who particularly stood out. His eyes narrowed further. Could the leader already be fighting the two lords, or is he not here? The thought made his heart palpitate. He couldn't imagine just how powerful the leader would be if he existed. What now? Anaz asked, his eyes sweeping across the vast chamber. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped as he caught the shift in Lazarus's expression. A faint smile tugged at his lips, his gaze fixed on the captains locked in battle above. What else? His body slowly floated, turning in their direction. He scratched the back of his neck at the same time as he slowly closed his eyes and deepened his connection with the hive monster. Then, with a single step forward, he faded from the spot, leaving Anaz at a complete loss. Single quote. Shit. Bang. Anne let out a quiet groan as a powerful blow struck her hand, the impact sending her skidding across the surface of the water. How in the fuck are these things so strong? Anne groaned as several silhouettes appeared around her, attacking her in different directions. Her eyes grew sharp as their movements traced across the water, and she just barely managed to avoid the attacks. Shit, avoiding wasn't the problem for her. The problem was the fact that they wouldn't stop coming at her. When one attack failed, they'd attack again, almost as though they had infinite stamina. This made her mind hurt as her skill relied heavily on her mind. Swoosh. Swiftly lowering her head to avoid another attack, she hastily looked back to see Silas also struggling to deal with the hollowed. Bang. Still, he fared a little better than her, thanks to his resilient build and surprising agility. Despite his broad frame, he moved through the water with startling speed. Most likely, he was the fastest amongst the seven lords. But even he had a hard time against the hollowed. Bang, bang, damn it, how are these things so fucking strong? What in the world is going on? Hearing Silas's scream, Anne looked around, her gaze settling onto the large altar at the center of the cave. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she more or less had her own guesses. Whoever is responsible for this entire thing isn't stirring the primordial one just for the sake of worshipping it. No, their goal is to destroy the entire city. Her first thoughts were on the other lands. They'd be the first ones she'd assume would want Virith Anish to be destroyed. However, she also quickly realized this wasn't possible. There was something else at play. Something that she couldn't understand, and just as she was avoiding another attack, her pupils dilated as she heard a scream from beside her. Ark! What? Her eyes widened in horror when she spotted a hand pierce right through Silas, his body stopping mid-motion. Blood seeped into the water as the world around her seemed to freeze. She couldn't make out the current situation. Silas. Dead. No. How? This makes no sense. He was strong. Really strong. How could he be defeated like this? It made absolutely no sense. Then, all eyes gradually turned on her as Silas's body fell onto the seabed. Thud. Her body grew weak at the sight. She might just be fucked. 633. Bang. The water rippled, something heavy crushing against Anne, who managed to block the attack. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. Unfortunately for her, just as she managed to deflect one attack, another came from above. Then below. Then above again. They struck from all directions, relentless and somewhat disorienting, but her emerald eyes glowed even brighter, piercing the darkness, catching every ripple in the water. With each shimmer, she saw the next strike before it came. This was a special ability of hers that she had managed to acquire after killing a certain beast within the Crimson Sea. It was a terror-ranked creature, and the main reason she was able to reign over the Crimson Sea for the past decade. Without this skill, she wouldn't have been able to make it to where she was. Swoosh. The water rippled again, and the attacks came again. Damn it, damn it. Anne just barely managed to dodge the attacks again, her eyes falling towards the falling captain beneath the water. Seeing the gaping hole on his chest and the fresh blood that was flowing out of it, she felt her heart sink. She still couldn't wrap her head around his death. How could someone as strong as him die like this? It made absolutely no sense to her. Unfortunately, she didn't have much time to process the shock. Ook. With several hands emerging all around her, Anne's eyes flickered again as she traced the path of their attacks and dodged their attacks. Her movements were nimble, she was avoiding everything, but, quote. That was until she felt her back hit something. When did I? Her heart sank when she saw the wall of the cave right behind her. Turning her head back to the hollowed, her face sank when she saw them surround her from all sides. Ah, this is bad. The situation had gone beyond what she had originally expected. Surrounded on all sides, she was put in an extremely disadvantageous situation. Her eyes flickered, and her teeth clenched. Looking around and seeing the figures slowly starting to approach her, the mana inside of her body boiled. The situation was bad, but she wasn't in despair. She had been through much worse, and she had yet to reveal her trump cards. Not yet. Single quote. Anne quietly waited for the hollow to move closer to her. Her eyes flickered beneath the water, locking onto the nearest hollowed. But just as she prepared to attack, something unexpected happened. Swoosh. Appearing from out of nowhere, a strange red light pulsed. Then, quote. One of the figures froze on the spot as a red light pulsed around their neck. Everything stopped at once as all heads flicked in the direction of the figure that had just materialized. It's you. Anne's eyes widened the moment she caught sight of Lazarus. She recognized him in an instant. Not because of how he looked, but because of the mana that he gave off. He was the same guy from before. He's alive, and her heart froze when she saw him standing behind the hollowed with a flat expression. His expression was calm as his gaze eventually fell on her. But the shock that gripped Anne only deepened as the hollowed figure before him slowly turned, its attention shifting toward the others. Then, swoosh, something shot through the air, hurtling in their direction. What? Anne's eyes widened as another hollowed was suddenly hurled through the water. Bang! The water rippled in its wake, then stilled. In the spot where the hollowed had landed, another now stood. This one had a piece of coral embedded in its neck, pulsing a faint red hue. Anne's gaze slowly turned towards the man who stared at the hollowed with narrowed eyes, his left eye twitching just subtly. Lazarus was currently trying his best to withstand the pain in his mind. He was having a really hard time. Resist. With your mental power and mind combined, we should be able to control all of them. The pain is not real. No, it was very much real. There was no denying the pain that he was currently experiencing. Lazarus's hand shook as he directed his gaze towards the other hollowed and then back towards Anne. He pointed his finger at her, and then the other hollowed. His message was clear: stop them so that I can control them. What? Anne looked at Lazarus with a baffled look. She could feel his strength straight away. He was around tier 6. She was struggling to understand how someone like him could control the hollowed like that. Something about the situation was off. However, understanding her current situation, she knew that she couldn't afford to waste time thinking. She had to act fast. Help him or not. The choice was obvious to her. Her emerald eyes flickered, locking onto the nearest hollowed. With a sharp flick of her hand, a long black whip coiled into existence. Without hesitation, she thrust it forward. It was almost as though the whip faded from her hand. The moment she slashed with it, the whip faded from view before appearing right before the hollowed. It was so fast that the hollowed was unable to react in time. Gotcha! The water rippled, and the hollowed hurled in Lazarus's direction as he stared at the incoming hollowed with a calm expression. He extended his hand and flung a piece of coral toward the hollowed. It struck immediately, latching onto the back of its neck as a faint red light pulsed in the water. The hollowed squirmed, and Lazarus's expression paled. Focus on enduring the pain. I'll control the puppets to protect you. The hive monster spoke in his mind as his head started to feel like it was being split apart. A couple of connections appeared in his mind at the same time, connecting the two hollowed with his mind. Although he could sense control over the two hollowed, each attempt felt like a sledgehammer crashing into his skull. It was really painful, and the more it hurt, the less he felt like he could focus on himself. No, I must resist. I can't fall apart here. Lazarus clenched his teeth and shut his eyes. At that moment, the hive monster linked to him seized control of the two nearby hollowed, forcing them to shield him from the incoming barrage launched by the others. There were 1, 2, 3, 4 hollowed in total that were trying to get to him, but as if in perfect sync, the hive monster managed to block all the incoming attacks. Lazarus used this chance to close his eyes, allowing for the darkness to take over his mind. He had to maintain focus. He couldn't allow the pain to bring him out of his current state. Until I reach the 5th level, I have to maintain focus. He had to immerse himself further into the character. He had to stop thinking of this as an act. He had to become the character. Lazarus, Lazarus, Lazarus. The wandering merchant from afar. He needed more layers. An emotive mage with curse magic. No, that was too much like Julian. He had to be different. He had to, quote. Lazarus gradually opened his eyes and looked around. While the pain in his head still existed, it wasn't as bad as before. He could tell that the hive monster was sharing some of the burden with him. He didn't know how many more hollowed he could control, but he decided to try his best to control as many as he possibly could. But for now, tapping his finger, a sword appeared in his hand. It was one of the many swords he had at his disposal. The sword wasn't anything great. Just a simple relic, but it was enough as he slowly raised it and looked around him. Lines appeared in his vision, tracing all sorts of paths. Lazarus finally understood what he had been missing the entire time. It was the sword. In order to fully adapt to the character, he had to change the way he fought. Bang! The water around him rippled as one of the hollowed he controlled hurled back next to him, its body riddled with all sorts of injuries. It was even missing one hand. Right as the first hollowed fell back, the other followed. Swoosh! Lazarus watched everything calmly as his gaze settled over the remaining hollowed. There were now 3 of them. He could tell that their strength had reached the 7th tier, almost at the 8th tier. They didn't waste a single second as they shot towards him. Lazarus didn't flinch as they moved. Instead, he tossed a couple of swords to the hollowed around him as the golden paths in front of him expanded. Go! With a casual look, he flicked his hand, and the hollowed under his control moved. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 hollowed mirrored the exact movements playing out in Lazarus's mind, their bodies now moving with a grace and fluidity that hadn't been there before. Lazarus's mind split even more as he controlled them, but he didn't bother with the pain. He focused his mind entirely on the paths in front of him, tracing them in his mind with the swords in the hollowed hands. The 2 moved in unison, effortlessly dodging incoming strikes while launching attacks of their own. Swoosh, swoosh. The situation turned around rather quickly. In just a few moments, they started to push the hollowed back. That was in spite of all the injuries in their bodies. Anna, who had been watching the entire time, couldn't help but open her mouth in shock as she looked at Lazarus. Was she seeing things? What sort of freak was this guy? She had a hard time hiding her shock as she started to shudder. It all suddenly made sense. The reason why he had been so bold to appear, and how he had managed to survive, back when she had ignored him. He was a monster. Anne pressed her lips tightly as she focused on her own hollowed. However, just as she did, the situation suddenly changed. Quote. Before either of them could react, a figure appeared behind Lazarus. A large hand clamped around his neck in an instant, squeezing it tightly under its grasp. By the time he managed to catch a glimpse of who it was, Anne's voice rang out across the water. Silas. 634. Anne stared in Silas's direction with wide eyes. Holding onto Lazarus with one hand as he struggled under his grasp, his hands flying as he tried to reach for him but to no avail, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. He was supposed to be dead. She saw it with her own eyes. The gaping hole in his chest, and his breath leaving his body. Anne had heard, long ago, of rare items and forbidden substances said to grant revival from death itself. One of the most famous was Mortem's blood. The direct blood of the god of immortality. Is it possible? No, there's no way. If he did have something like that, he'd already be gone by now. The collectors weren't things that they could afford to provoke. It had to be something else. Something. Quote. Ah. Anne's expression changed drastically as Silas's eyes started to change. Gradually, they started to turn a familiar white color, and her heart sank as Lazarus appeared to struggle even further under his grip. She wanted to move, but couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on Silas. Finally, she started to understand the situation, and her heart sank deep into her stomach. A hollowed. Silas. He was a hollowed. Ah. A weird sound came out of Silas's mouth as his head started to contort and twist. It twitched a couple of times before settling back to normal, his gaze slowly lowering to meet hers. Anne. His voice was like a quiet whisper. One that appeared to be mixed with 20 other voices. Male and female, young and old, soft and guttural, dozens of voices layered into one. The unnatural harmony sent a shiver down Anne's spine, raising every hair on her body. Lazarus continued to struggle beneath Silas's grip, which only tightened with each passing second. His face was pale, and his struggles only grew with time. He was starting to get desperate. Anne wanted to help, but she couldn't. She couldn't afford to help, as her entire body tensed as she looked at Silas. She was trying to make sense of the situation. Since when was he one? From the start, or did he get taken over by them at one point? Hollowed weren't rare to see. They did tend to appear from time to time. People who had their minds taken over by the voices of the past. There were times when she had seen several hollowed in the past. But never in her life did she meet one this strong. This was an extremely big crisis. Especially since hollowed fed on people in order to become stronger. They fed on people and turned them into voices. This was why most hollowed were hunted down when found. They were like parasites, extremely dangerous. And the fact that Silas was one and yet no one had noticed the entire time made things even creepier. This situation was a lot more complicated than anticipated. What are you thinking so much about? There's no need for you to think much. Just quietly accept the situation and come to me. What are you thinking so much about? There's no need for you to think much. Just quietly accept the situation and come to me. Silas's voice whispered once again, pulling her attention towards him. I have been waiting for so long for this moment. I had been planning for so long, and I expected to take longer, but then he showed up. I have been waiting for so long for this moment. I had been planning for so long, and I expected to take longer, but then he showed up. Silas lowered his head to stare at Lazarus, his lips slowly pulling as his white eyes flickered. He was the last ingredient I had been missing for so long, and the moment we found him, we knew that I couldn't wait any longer. We pushed everything forward and lured the two of you here. Only with the two of you present can we finally ascend. He was the last ingredient I had been missing for so long. Anne's face paled upon hearing Silas's words. This was planned all along. To advance. Wait, advance. Her entire body froze upon hearing those words. If he were to advance, just how strong would he become? I can't let this happen. This might be extremely bad. If he were to be allowed to advance, he would become an extremely terrifying existence within the mirror dimension. Only a few would be able to stop him, but as a continuously growing creature, it wouldn't be long before it rose to a point where only the primordial ones or the gods could do something about it. Anne's eyes sharpened as she looked around. She needed to find a way out of this place. He did say that I'm an ingredient. In that case, so long as he doesn't get me, I'll be able to delay his plan for a bit. I'll relay everything to the temple. They might get the goddess to interfere directly. Though she thought this, she didn't actually have much faith in her plan. It looked like Silas had planned this situation extremely well, and she also didn't have much faith in the goddess doing anything. She, alongside the remaining gods, was extremely indifferent to the world. They had also not shown up in hundreds of years. Anne clenched her teeth, her eyes darting around even more frantically. How do I? That was when it happened. In the midst of her thoughts, and just as Silas was about to open his mouth, a change occurred in Lazarus's direction. He suddenly stopped struggling, almost as though he had never struggled to begin with. Then, his body began to change slowly. His hair faded to a lifeless gray, and his cheeks hollowed, sinking into his skull. The change came abruptly, startling both Anne and Silas as they looked in Lazarus's direction. But the most striking change wasn't even his appearance change. No, it was his eyes. They slowly started to turn white. Anne paused, and that was when she noticed it. The figure standing right behind Silas, his hand outstretched and placed onto the back of his neck. Lazarus floated calmly in the water as he squeezed Silas's head. Fear, he mumbled in his mind as he channeled his emotive magic. He poured everything into his hands. He wanted to completely incapacitate Silas. He was confident his emotive magic was strong enough to do that. But, kekek, the expected reaction never occurred. Instead, he was greeted by a mocking laugh as Silas slowly turned his head, and his white eyes stared directly at him. As expected, I didn't choose wrong. You were the right person all along. As expected, I didn't choose wrong. You were the right person all along. Lazarus's expression remained stoic as he met Silas's gaze. He was calm in spite of the situation as he slowly pulled his hand away and nodded. Right, he must be after my emotive magic. He had more or less guessed this during their first meeting, especially when he touched his hand. Lazarus recalled feeling something strange as he placed an emotive tag on him. Or at least tried to. Very clearly, the tag didn't set into his body. At first, Lazarus was confused, but now it all made sense. Silas, or more like, the Hollowed. They had no emotions. They were just an empty canvas of lingering memories. The situation became clearer to him the moment he met the first Hollowed, and he started to put the pieces together. My previous guess about this being a trap wasn't wrong. Silas purposely lured me into this place in order to use me as an ingredient to advance further. The timing of which everything started also coincides with everything I've found out. Lazarus's eyes remained calm as he scanned Silas. There was not an ounce of fear in his face despite his emotive magic not working. Why was that? Anne thought as she looked at him. Was this some sort of facade of his? But looking at him, it felt deeper than that. She didn't have to wait long for an answer. The moment Lazarus lifted his hand from Silas's head, Silas struck, his arm slicing through the water, aiming straight for Lazarus, who stood perfectly still. Quote. Anne's face changed when she saw Silas's hand grasping Lazarus's neck. He didn't even attempt to run away as Silas's lips pulled into a sinister smile. We got you. But his smile didn't last for long as Lazarus's body faded, replaced by one of the Hollowed from before. Appearing right below, Lazarus calmly looked at Silas. Quote. You won't be able to catch me. One of the skills granted to him by the hive mind was the ability to swap places with anything that had a coral attached to them. The ability consumed a lot of mana and mental power. Therefore, he could only use it a couple of times. But that was more than enough for him to simply run away. Lazarus locked eyes with Silas, their gazes holding for a long, heavy moment. But then, a slow, sinister smile crept across Silas's lips as he shifted his focus toward the altar below. Lazarus's brows furrowed tightly at the sight. He started to have a bad feeling about the situation. But contrary to his expectations, Silas raised both hands, seemingly in a gesture of surrender. Very well done. His voice whispered in the water. Quote. You managed to trick us. Very good job. Quote. You managed to trick us. Very good job. Silas nodded his head slowly before turning his attention towards Anne. His eyes locked with hers for a brief moment until he smiled. And then, swoosh, he disappeared from the spot. Quote. The sudden turn of events completely caught the two off guard as they stared blankly in the direction of where Silas had previously been standing. Did he just run away? This was the first thought that ran through their mind. A subtle tremor pulsed beneath them, barely perceptible, like a breath from something old and ancient. But they felt it. Both heads snapped toward the altar in the distance, where a sickly green light had begun to seep through the cracks. Then, the surface split. Crack. Slowly, unnaturally, the smooth stone of the altar peeled open, not like machinery but like flesh parting unwillingly. A wet, glistening eye emerged from the darkness within. It was massive and horrifying. The moment its pupil surfaced, the world stopped. Time itself fractured. The water froze in place, bubbles caught mid-rise, hair suspended like threads of glass. Sound died. Motion died. Even thoughts grew sluggish. Only the eye moved, and it was staring directly at them. Both stared back, their bodies frozen in place as they recognized the eye. That eye, it belonged to none other than Zerul, the great primordial one. 635. The eye stood above the altar. It was large, the pupil curled into a thin slit. The moment it opened, it was as though the surroundings had frozen in place. The world refused to move. Lazarus, Anne, and Anaz could only stand completely still, their entire bodies frozen in place as cold sweat trickled down their back. What was this? The eyes of the three trembled, their thoughts starting to fade. The vertical slit of its pupil stretched endlessly, a void deeper than the abyss itself, and from it radiated a sinister red glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. It wasn't just looking at them. It was peering through them. Every instinct screamed to flee, but their bodies were paralyzed. Trapped in that crimson gaze, as if even the notion of resistance had been stripped from their bones. The eye knew them, every secret, every fear, every thought they'd ever tried to bury. It knew it all, and the idea itself felt suffocating. A deep sense of helplessness washed over them. It was a sense of helplessness that stemmed from their insignificance in front of the creature before them. They were like specks of dust before it. And then, as all hope seemed lost, the eye closed. It began to fade shortly after, the altar cracking beneath before shattering completely. Bang! Time started to move once again as the three of them stood frozen in place, minds and eyes blank. There were no thoughts in their minds as they stood still in the water. This persisted for an unknown period of time until their eyes started to regain some clarity. Where did Silas go? Did he run away? He shouldn't have gone far. Anne's voice was the first to break the silence around them as she hastily looked around, her emerald eyes piercing through her surroundings. She had to find him at all costs. She couldn't allow someone like him to roam the land. He was a walking calamity. Anne tried to feel her surroundings, but regardless of how hard she tried, she couldn't feel his presence at all. He was gone. He was nowhere near them anymore. Shit, Anne cursed before turning her attention towards Anaz and Lazarus. The two were standing blankly, their expressions a little dazed. She found their actions to be a little weird. There's no way Silas's disappearance affected them this much, right? It'd be odd if it did. Thankfully, Anaz recovered rather quickly as he looked around, his face pale. He was also looking for Silas, afraid he'd show up out of nowhere and attack them. And yet, that never happened. He was gone, and even as they waited, he never showed up. Eventually, his gaze fell on Anne, and his body stiffened. He looked at her, completely at a loss, his eyes squirming before settling on Lazarus, who was slowly coming out of his daze. No, not quite. He wasn't quite Lazarus. As Julian's eyes flickered, he looked around, his eyes starting to regain their usual focus. What just happened? I felt lost. Looking around me, I was at a complete loss. Why did I lose concentration? Why am I? The more I looked around, the more confused I became. In one moment, I was dealing with Silas, and in the next moment, he disappeared. That was also the moment I snapped out of my persona. But why did I snap out of it? What could have caused my focus to fade like that? I tried to recall anything that could have caused such a situation, but I couldn't. Nothing. I couldn't think of anything, and that was what made me extremely apprehensive. I was extremely confused and lost. This situation made no sense to me at all. All right, it doesn't matter. I'll just try to go back to it. I tried to return to Lazarus. But the moment I did, a sharp pain shot through me, snapping me out of my focus. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. Holding on to the side of my face, my lips trembled. My mind, it was completely drained. I could hardly focus enough to use any of my major skills. And whenever I did try, the pain would return. What the hell is going on? I tried to get in contact with the hive mind, but I was even more surprised to see it unresponsive. I hastily touched the back of my neck to see if it was still there, and much to my surprise, it wasn't. What? How is this possible? Wasn't it attached to me? When did it leave? The more the situation unfolded, the creepier and more eerie it became as my heart pressed against my chest. I lowered my head and looked down. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. That was when I spotted a small red coral, different from the rest, with a large beak protruding from its center. Was this its real form? I didn't hesitate to move down and grab it. It's still alive, but it's not responding. The situation felt incredibly eerie. For whatever reason, my mind was completely drained, and the hive mind, a destroyer-ranked creature, had detached itself from my body, almost as though it had been harmed by someone or something powerful. My frown deepened further as I looked at the small coral in my mind. If I wanted to, I could probably kill it with a squeeze of my hand. I could gain its bone and sell it for a lot of money. It was extremely vulnerable, but, since it didn't do me any harm, I won't do it any harm either. I also had a lot of money available for myself. I didn't need to do this. It was better to turn the hive mind into my ally than to kill it. I also wanted to know if it had any idea of what was going on. I'll wait until it recovers before asking. With those thoughts, I tucked the coral away and looked up to find Anne and Anas staring at me. I gave them a brief glance before lowering the gravity around me and moving up the water. Anne pulled her gaze from me as I moved up, her emerald eyes glowing as she looked around once again. She's most likely looking for Silas. I was also curious to know where he was. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford to waste any more time here. Originally, I should have been able to stay here for a little longer. I had about 15 minutes left. However, things were different now. For some reason, I had less than a few minutes left of air inside my lungs. The situation was quite bad, actually. I had to get back up as soon as possible. Thankfully, Anne soon gave up her search for Silas and shook her head. I walked past her, heading back the way we came. I need to hurry up. I had to get back up as soon as possible. I heightened the gravity around me and started to sprint out of the temple. I thought I was fast, but compared to Anne, I was extremely slow. She zoomed past me, shooting up towards the upper floors. Staring at her back, I flicked my hand and shot a thread in her direction. The simple action pierced my mind as I flinched. How does this hurt more than step of suppression? Quote. Sensing the thread, Anne slowed down and turned to look at me. A frown marred her features as she looked at me. She didn't seem to be very pleased with my actions. I couldn't care less as I pointed at my nose and then up. Her brows rose up. Then, as if understanding the situation, she moved towards me and extended her hand. I reached for it and looked back to see Anaz not far away, also reaching with his hand. Grabbing the two of us, Anne's body shot away. Quote. The moment she started moving, my face twisted as the water smacked against it. It wasn't until I used my mana to shield myself that I was able to stop it. Slowly, I turned my head and saw Anaz watching me. His expression was blank, almost unreadable as both his eyes were open into large O's. Then, PFTTT. He started laughing. Keck. That didn't last very long, though, as his simple action made him lose the little air he had in his lungs. Quote. Yuck. I started laughing too. But, oh, shit, KH. I also lost air and started struggling beneath the water as I covered my mouth with my hand. Anaz was no better. His face had turned completely pale, slowly turning purple. I figured I must have looked the same. I was trying my very best not to show any reaction at this moment. Though I wasn't Lazarus, I needed to keep the persona clear. This bastard, he is sabotaging me. Splash. Thankfully, we soon reached the surface of the water, and I took deep and heavy breaths as I started to float on the surface of the red water. Ha! 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 Anaz emerged right next to me, similarly struggling for breath. My head felt light, my body completely drained. As I drifted across the crimson sea, I stared blankly at the white sun above and let out a long, weary breath. I fucking hate the water. This experience had solidified this thought for me. I used to not mind the beach, but after this, I wasn't even sure I'd be able to go to one ever again. Have you two recovered enough? Bringing me out of my thoughts was a certain voice, and when I turned my head, I saw Anne standing above the water, her clothes completely dry and arms crossed. There are quite a few questions that I want to ask the two of you. She smiled. I hope you won't mind that. I closed my eyes. I really did hate the sea. Chapter 636, Lock 3. Quote. Who are you? The questioning began as I found myself aboard a large ship, its wooden cabin dimly lit by a single lamp, just enough to make out Anne standing before me. She didn't waste a single moment after getting out of the water, dragging Anaz and me into her ship. Neither of us could put up a fight, and in the end, we were both dragged in. Just my luck. You especially. Anne nudged her head at me, her brows furrowing. I've never seen you before. What? I looked at her weirdly. And why would you have seen me before? Are you saying that you know the faces of everyone within Virith Anish? That'd be ridiculous. No. The captain shook her head before pointing at her eye, which shone a faint green emerald hue. Quote. But I can tell if I've ever met someone before. I raised my brow, but understood. She probably isn't lying. I had seen enough from her and those weird eyes of hers to know that she was most likely not lying. I grew curious while staring at her eyes. Was this a byproduct of a bone? Since I'm not familiar with you, I take it that you're not from around here. Where exactly are you from? The captain continued to press me. I just stared back at her while leaning against the wooden chair I sat on. It was rather uncomfortable. It also didn't look like I was detained, as I had no restraints on me, but it felt like I was. I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. If I weren't detained, I didn't know what I was. Anaz was also in a similar situation, even though she appeared to be somewhat familiar with him. Or at least, she seemed to recognize him. He was probably here because of me. I'm just a traveling merchant from afar. I've been here for quite some time now. I've also opened up a recent shop. The Grey Charm. Yes, I know. Then, it doesn't change the fact that you are suspicious. And how exactly does that help you in any way? I'm pretty sure you have more serious matters to tend to. Like, you know, a certain captain who magically disappeared from out of nowhere the moment that it was revealed he was a hollowed. Yeah, I'm not buying that. He was certainly planning something. He wouldn't just let us go after revealing that we were important ingredients for his plan. Something was at work beneath the surface, and it all traced back to the moment he vanished. In that instant, my mind drained, and the hive creature slipped from my neck, collapsing to the ground. Something happened in that moment. I felt that was the key to understanding the situation and what Silas was planning. Quote. The captain's eyes flickered as she looked at me. Her thoughts were unknown to me, and each passing second felt like it dragged on forever. But that all ended a second after as she sighed. Yes, you're right. She sat down on her chair. Quote. Although I'm still suspicious about your origins, I've seen enough to think that you're not on his side. At least, for now. Her eyes narrowed, and I felt a cold chill running down the back of my neck. I could only force myself to remain calm while looking at her. But at the same time, a thought occurred to me. I originally planned on trying to get Silas to bring me to the eclipsed maw. However, now that she's here, there's nothing that says I shouldn't use her. She was one of the 7 lords and was most likely not a hollowed. About that part, at this point, anyone could be a hollowed. Her lips pursed as she tapped her arm. The situation is rather troublesome. I've already reported the matter to those of the temple. The best course of action is to wait for them to give us a reply before deciding on the next steps to take. Next steps? What was she talking about? She rolled her eyes. Are you stupid? Do you think that Silas is just going to leave like that? He very obviously has got us locked or targeted. He must have formed some sort of plan and is actively trying to hunt us. I don't understand the reason why he suddenly left, but I'm sure it must be part of his plan. I'll need the 2 of you to remain with me in the meantime. What? It was Anaz who shouted. He looked at Anne with wide eyes. What do you mean remain with you in the meantime? No. I can't remain here. He stood up while biting his nails, walking around his chair, occasionally glancing in the captain's direction, and mumbling things like, I can't leave my post for too long. If I do, all my work will go to waste. I need to be promoted. I can't fail like this. Ah, there he was again. Him and his obsession with the temple. Looking at him and seeing his expression, I grew even more curious. His obsession, it felt somewhat weird. What exactly did this goddess do to make him this loyal and obsessed with them? I previously checked, and there were no signs of emotive magic or spirit magic on him. He seemed to genuinely worship her. What the fuck? As I heard the captain's words and I turned my head to meet her gaze, I explained. He's from the temple. Oh, you're not supposed to say that. Anaz quickly turned to me, but it was already too late. He could only awkwardly look at the captain, who made quite an expression. Well then, I guess I don't need force to keep you here, do I? Quote. Anaz looked at me in despair. I could also see hints of hatred in there, but I just nodded my head. That's for nearly killing me back there. He gave up shortly after. That's about it from me. The captain began moving towards the door of the room. She nudged the 2 of us with her head. Follow me, I'll bring you guys out to get you familiar with the ship. You'll stay here until I manage to get this situation sorted. Clank, the wooden door opened, and the strong scent of iron and salt entered the room. Lazarus glanced in Anaz's direction before following her from behind. Anaz could only follow along shortly after. He was still mumbling a few things, but he also realized that he had no real say in the situation. Even the temple had to be respectful to one of the 7 lords. What did he think he could do? I shook my head and stepped out of the room. A long, wooden corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by scattered lamps. It extended for several meters before ending at a staircase that led upward. The 3 of us walked in silence as we passed by several crewmates. Greetings, Captain. Quote. Captain. From the way they were greeting her, it was clear that they highly respected her. I looked around, taking in the sight before moving up the stairs as the scent of iron and salt became more pronounced and the all too familiar gray sky appeared. Long white sails billowed from a massive mast, each one stretching at least 30 meters. Above them, a green flag fluttered in the wind. Make sure the anchor is ready. Time to swab the decks. Check for dry rot. Caulk the seams. The ship's main deck was littered with crewmates as they roamed around, shouting and barking orders as the place felt extremely lively. I stared at the scene before me with interest. This was the first time I had ever seen pirates in action, and it was quite an interesting sight. Even their accents were quite interesting to hear. This right here is the main deck. It's where the main mast stands tall, right in the center. And if you look to the sides. She gestured toward the heavy cannons lined along the ship's edge. You'll see these beauties. One shot from them could blast the likes of you two into splinters. Costs a fortune, though, so I'd rather not waste a single round unless I have to." She laughed as she said those words. I didn't think she was joking. Staring at the cannons and seeing the numerous runes placed on them, I could tell that it wasn't anything simple. "There's no particular rule that you need to follow while being on this ship." The captain began to lead the two of us throughout the ship, explaining its layout in detail. I didn't really understand why she was doing this, but I soaked in the information in my mind. In case something did happen, it was best to know everything about the ship. I was rather unlucky. The main rules of the ship would just be to listen to my orders. Whatever I say goes, and that's pretty much it. Oh, yeah, don't kill and do shit that you wouldn't do in the city. Just common sense type stuff. Oh, I could do that. This wasn't really hard to follow. The captain began to rumble more about the ship. About how she had managed to acquire it, what she went through, and all of that stuff. I listened attentively while staring at the crimson sea that stretched towards the white sun that hung in the distance. Something about the reflection of the white sun on the red waters felt enchanting. Lazarus couldn't pull his gaze away from it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I only snapped out of it when I heard the captain's voice whisper from my right as she stood with her arms crossed, her gaze locked onto the horizon. When did she move next to me? This sight is one of the reasons I do what I do. Her curly hair fluttered as she looked into the distance. Dangerous as it is, the crimson sea. It's also breathtaking. But this isn't even close to its finest sights. I've sailed through places so deadly they make your blood chill, and yet, each one was more beautiful than the last. The Isle of Broken Oaths, the Scalding Reefs, the Lantern Path, the Eclipsed Maw. I've seen them all. Her emerald eyes sparkled as she spoke, and Lazarus slowly pulled his attention towards the distant horizon, too. Neither said a word as they stared at the crimson sea. Indeed, it was quite beautiful. 637. Temple of the Goddess of Light. Within the private chambers of the temple, several figures sat, all staring towards the white-garbed figure. His presence eclipsed that of all those present as the Luminarch looked around. Has anything been found yet? The meeting was being held to address the ongoing red tide and the possibility of it being a man-made disaster. No, nothing yet. A short man with neatly combed black hair and a long nose answered as he held onto several papers. He was the temple's member secretary. He was essentially in charge of handling all of the reports and news received by the emissaries. While there have been some unusual movements from the land of the great god of creation, Veltris, we've observed nothing out of the ordinary from the other lands. In truth, I don't believe any of them intend to interfere, they're simply too far. I see. The land within the mirror dimension was divided between the 5 gods. Of those 5 gods, the land of creation was the closest one to theirs. They controlled a major part of the upper world, or what was once known as Russia. If it had to be anyone who could interfere with them, then it had to be them. There was also Cloara's land, but it was unlikely that they'd be able to reach it. They were simply too far. Do you have any idea why strange movements are coming from those of the land of creation? The Luminarch asked while staring at the member secretary. This piece of news was nothing to make short of. Quote. No, unfortunately, our spies weren't able to pick up anything. The member secretary shook his head. They're being very careful, so it's hard to determine anything. However, from what we've managed to gather, it doesn't seem like it has anything to do with us. I believe it's an ongoing conflict between them in the Land of Foundations. Goddess Clora's faction against Great God Veltris. The Luminarch raised his brow. This was quite an interesting development. For what reason could the two lands be fighting? Those two usually never got into conflicts. In fact, those two were usually the ones who avoided conflicts the most. For them to suddenly do something like this, it must be something really important. The Luminarch pressed his hand against the table before making a decision. Send more people to investigate the matter. Get in contact with the other temples and spread the news to them. We need to keep watch of the situation. The situation might not be as simple as it looks on the surface. Understood. The member secretary answered promptly, jotting down several things on a small notepad he retrieved from his pocket. Pursing his lips, the Luminarch leaned back on his chair. His fingers drummed over the table. If there's no outside interference, what could have caused the Great Primordial One to interfere like this? The Luminarch's brows pressed together tightly. He had already informed the other Luminarchs present within the nearby cities about the situation, with them sending backups for the inevitable situation. However, if the Great Primordial One showed up, he'd be completely helpless. Although he was near the 9th tier, he was still far from being able to put up a fight with such a monster. The only thing he could do at this very moment was hope that things wouldn't escalate to that point. But would they really not? It was hard to tell. The Luminarch's hand came to a sudden pause as his gaze fell on the door of the room. His eyes narrowed shortly after as he stood up. And, then, bang, the door burst open. What's going on? All members stood up as they turned to look in the direction of the door, where a haggard figure appeared, holding onto the side of his arm as his chest rose and fell repeatedly. Ha! Ha! The moment his features became apparent, the Luminarch's expression changed. He recognized the one in question immediately. Silas. How could he not? He was one of the few people who could threaten him within the city. It was only natural for him to recognize him. But how did he become like this? What happened? Help. Silas mumbled, his face pale as he looked pleadingly towards the Luminarch. I've found out the ones responsible for all of this. His voice was haggard, and he looked to be struggling to even get a few words out. Hollowed. Primordial One. Merchant. He was hardly making any sense, but he said enough words to give an idea to the Luminarch. He also paused at his last word. Merchant. The Luminarch thought about the recent news about a wandering merchant from afar, and how he had been selling very rare goods into the city. Matching the timing of his appearance with the situation, and surely, it can't be a coincidence, right? But as if that wasn't enough to plant a seed of doubt in the Luminarch's mind, Silas's words echoed again. This time, his words were a lot easier to understand. Underwater. I noticed something strange and I investigated with Anne. It was a trap. She, alongside the merchant, tried to ambush me underwater. Thankfully, I managed to escape, but I saw them break some sort of altar. The great primordial one. He's coming. He's already locked his position on them. What? Everyone's eyes widened at the news, and as the Luminarch took in the information, he took a long and dragged-out breath. Eventually, his eyes sharpened. Someone, go and find their location and relay it to me. If it's true that they've been marked by the Great Primordial One, kill them on the spot. Finding out whether they had been marked wasn't hard. The church had the necessary tools to be able to tell after getting close enough. I'll get moving. A terrifying aura seeped out from the Luminarch's body as he moved out of the room. He had to get rid of the problem as quickly as possible. What he didn't notice as he left the room was the quiet curling of Silas's lips as he gradually sat up. Pshaw, the water ran down the sink as I stared at my own reflection. My face gradually contorted as I stared at myself. I don't know if the situation is good or not. My chest felt heavy as I looked at myself. The more I looked, the more my appearance felt less foreign. I was starting to get used to this appearance of mine. That of Lazarus. So much so that for just brief moments, I felt like this was what my true appearance was. The moments were small, but it was starting to become clear to me. The boundaries between my personality and Lazarus were starting to shrink. I was threading dangerous territory. I'm immersing myself too much. I started to worry about the consequences of my actions. What would happen if I immersed myself in the character for too much? Would I slowly just end up becoming Lazarus? Then what about the current me? The thought felt heavy in my heart. Although this persona was necessary in order for me to reach the 5th tier, I was starting to worry. If Cithras has already reached the 5th level, does that mean that he went through something like this? I swallowed silently. What were the results for him? Was he able to return to how he once was, or who? I took a deep breath, brushing my hair back. Lazarus stared at his reflection as the water trickled down the side of his face. He stared at his well-defined features before reaching for his glasses next to him. He was just about to put them on when his hand paused. I let out another breath. This time, my chest trembled as I stared at the glasses in my hand. This is worse than I expected. I wasn't even trying to become Lazarus again, and yet, the persona just automatically tried to settle itself into my mind, constantly taking over for brief moments of time. I can't allow that. Things were getting a little bit too dangerous for my own comfort. I needed to take some time to properly address this issue. But for now, I retrieved a certain piece of coral and placed it in the water inside the sink. It's been a while. You still struggling to recover? I tapped the coral several times in hopes of seeing some movement. However, it still didn't move at all. I could tell that it was still alive, but something about it felt off. What exactly was the reason? Pebble, do you have any idea? The only thing I could do was call Pebble and ask for its opinion. Surely Pebble might know something, considering that it is also a monster. But, no, nothing. Pebble shook its head as it sat by the sink, staring at the coral with its deep eyes. Pebble extended its paw and touched the coral. I've never seen something like this before. No, wait. Pebble leaned forward and started to sniff the coral. I was a little taken aback by the sight. Why did Pebble feel the need to sniff the coral? But soon enough, I saw a reaction from Pebble. What is it? Did you notice something? No, but I think I know who might have an idea. Pebble's tone was grave as it looked at the coral. I cocked my head. Who else but that stupid owl? From the looks of things, this monster was affected by some sort of mind spell. Considering how it's still alive but unresponsive, it's the only thing I can think of. Pebble soon turned its head to look at me. You're not much different. Your mind also appears to be affected. Oh, but mine was because of something else entirely. Or was it? I thought about my current predicament and the timing of it. Now that I thought about it, everything started to go wrong with me the moment that I came back out of the water. Could there be a correlation to the situation? You're right. Something about this entire situation feels off. I guess I'll knock. An abrupt, yet loud knocking sound echoed throughout the room. Hastily turning my head, I saw the door of the bathroom smash open as a figure entered. Get out. We've got a situation. The emissaries of the Temple of Light are coming to us. 638. What's going on here? What are you doing? Anne's voice echoed across the city's port as her curly hair fluttered in the wind. She stood atop her shop, gazing down at the sudden swarm of emissaries from the Temple of Light. Her brows furrowed tightly upon seeing them. There were so many of them that she couldn't count their exact number. What are they doing here? Why did they suddenly come? Though she didn't fear them, she was still deeply apprehensive about the situation. Something about this entire thing felt off. Is nobody going to say a single thing? Her words once again echoed throughout the port as she looked down at the emissaries. But yet again, she received no answers. Her entire demeanor started to shift from there as a certain pressure started to spread out from her body and onto the emissaries beneath. She was starting to lose her patience. If none of you are going to answer, then relax, calm down, let's keep this civil. Just as tensions began to rise, a soft voice cut through the pressure. In the distance, a figure draped in white appeared, his face hidden behind a golden mask. The emissaries silently parted to let him pass. Anne's brow raised upon seeing him. Luminarch Jophiel, that is indeed me. The Luminarch came to a stop just right beneath her ship, his head tilted to look at her. The moment he appeared, Anne's entire demeanor changed as the pressure coming out from her body started to fade. By no means was she scared of the man who stood before her. However, something about him had always made her uncomfortable. It was for that reason that she actively decided to back down. She would much rather talk than have things go bad. A thin smile spread across her lips as she looked down. What have I done to grace me with your presence? Nothing yet, the Luminarch said, his voice light and calm. From the way he spoke, it really did seem like he was coming in peace. That made Anne even more uncomfortable. The harder it was to see through his intentions, the more complicated the situation felt. Is that so? But I'm not so sure I can believe your words when you showed up with so many people. Oh, pardon me for that. The Luminarch looked around him. As you know, times are rather tough right now. In order to go out, the temple has insisted on bringing a lot of people. This is all for my protection. Protection, I find that hard to believe. Anne almost wanted to laugh. He was one of the strongest people within the city. There was hardly anyone who could pose a threat to him within the city. Ha ha. Seeing her reaction, the Luminarch laughed. He laughed for a few seconds before looking around. I guess you're right, but who am I to reject their offer? Aren't they cute in their own way for wanting to protect me? Cute? Anne looked at him in disgust. She could clearly see that he was wasting time talking with her. What was he trying to do? What was he trying to achieve? Her sharp eyes scanned the surroundings as she tried her best to see any strange movement. However, regardless of where she looked, she couldn't see anything strange about the situation. So then, what exactly was he planning? Anne's heart grew restless as she settled her gaze back towards the Luminarch. Just as her lips were about to part, a figure walked up towards the Luminarch, whispering something into his ears. Anne tried to peer through the conversation, but she could only hear faint bits of it. Something along the lines of, targeted, he was right, must get rid, danger. Ah, as her eyelids fluttered, she looked towards the Luminarch again as she saw him staring at her, his features hidden within his golden mask. However, despite the mask hiding his features, in that very moment, Anne felt that he was smiling. That, he had some sort of sickening smile beneath the mask. She felt the hair at the back of her neck rise as she grew tense. I'm afraid I've got some bad news for you. Anne's lips pressed tightly, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at the Luminarch. She started to have a sinking feeling that things were about to turn for the worse. Quote. I've just had someone look at you, and, well. The Luminarch moved his head left and right as he tried his best to put things nicely for her. In the end, he sighed and just went straight to the point. You're currently marked by the Great Primordial One. Huh, Anne's face blanked. Marked by the Great Primordial One? When? What? Not just you, but a couple of others within the ship have been marked. He pinched the lower end of his mask. Taking a look at your expression, you most likely don't seem to be aware of it. Or maybe you're pretending like you don't know. The Luminarch's eyes narrowed beneath. If my guess is correct, then you all must have fallen for some sort of scheme devised by Captain Silas. I did notice that his injuries were a bit off. Only a few match the type of weapon that you use. Silas. Anne's eyes widened. You've met him, then you should quickly go back to him. He's not. It doesn't matter. I've already marked him. He won't be able to get away even if he wants to. Just as I'm going to deal with you, I'm going to deal with him. Jophiel smiled as he looked at Anne. Quote. I can also extract all the information that I want after I take you in. Well, if I take you in. Given the current situation, taking you in might not be ideal. In fact, I should be dealing with you as we speak. He raised his hand, and the emissaries next to him got into battle positions, their weapons drawn. You don't have to do this. Anne's expression darkened at the sight presented before her. Looking back towards her own crew, she mumbled, "Get ready," as they similarly drew their weapons while looking down at the emissaries. The tensions escalated as Anne looked at the Luminarch. He could only shake his head upon seeing her reaction. I'm sure you understand why I have to do this, right? It's not that I want to be unreasonable, but it's more about the fact that I have no choice but to be unreasonable. You're currently targeted by the Primordial One. If you stay here, then you'll be putting the entire city in danger. The only real option we have is to kill you. Quote. Is there really no way we can talk about this? The Luminarch shook his head. Like I said, we have no choice in this matter. He gestured with his hands once more, and the emissaries started to release their own pressure. Taking out her whip, Anne's entire demeanor changed as she took a deep breath. Very well. She looked at her crew next to her. It was just as she was about to attack when. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. Her expression changed as she hastily turned back and raised her whip. Clank. A loud metallic sound rang in the air as sparks flew across. What the? Anne's expression changed drastically when she saw several of her own crew members turn their weapons on her. What are you doing? Why are you? Sorry about that, Captain. This one might be on me. It was the Luminarch who spoke again as he looked at her from below. He looked at her with interest. Your people were a lot more loyal than expected, but in the end, under our constant offers, we've managed to turn quite a few on our side. We've long known about your movements. What? The Luminarch cocked his head. Did you really think we would let you dominate the Crimson Sea because we're nice? Ha ha ha. The Luminarch laughed while shaking his head. Eventually, however, his tone and expression turned serious. We value order above all. The only reason you're free to sail the seas is because we permit it. If we wished, we could take full control. The temple saw no need to interfere directly when you were already keeping the waters in check on our behalf. Naturally, to preserve that balance, we had no choice but to place several spies among you. He looked around, and I guess that worked out for the best. In any case, he nudged the people next to him. It's time we finish this. I hope that you forg. What's going on here? A certain voice cut through the Luminarch's voice as a certain figure walked into the main dock, stopping to see the numerous people surrounding the ship. His gaze was sharp, his jawline chiseled, and every aspect of him radiated refinement and elegance. Staring at the situation, the man slowly put on his glasses before eventually, his gaze fell on the Luminarch. Many of those on the boat grew startled at the sight of him. How did he appear without them noticing? Even Anne was shocked. However, she quickly clenched her teeth as she looked at the one surrounding the merchant. They had all once been her people. For them to turn on her like that. How could this have happened? Anne's heart sank into the deepest depths. She thought she had treated them well, and yet, she had been too naive. The spies began to surround the merchant shortly after. And yet, in spite of the situation, he looked completely unbothered as he maintained eye contact with the Luminarch. Tilting his head, the Luminarch thought for a moment before saying, "You must be the merchant. Quote. You know me, I've heard a little bit about you. This is the first time I'm seeing you, though." Jophiel calmly nodded his head while looking at the merchant. At first glance, he didn't look like much. A hidden tier 6 with nothing really special about him besides his origin. Jophiel was curious about his true identity, but it was just unfortunate that he was also marked by the primordial one. He had to go too. What a pity. Jophiel shook his head before nudging the emissaries next to him. Get rid of them. We have to be as fast as possible so that we can prevent the red tide. Understood. The emissaries moved alongside the spies on the ship. As this happened, the merchant remained indifferent. No, rather, a thin smile spread across his lips. He's smiling. The moment Jophiel caught sight of the smile, his expression changed. Something felt off. He suddenly started to have a bad feeling. But before he could understand it, a red leaf slowly fell on the ground. Red leaf. Jophiel blinked his eyes. Then, slowly raising his head, he saw an owl standing right above them, its deep eyes staring at them. Bah, thump, bah, thump. For some reason, staring at the owl, Jophiel felt his heart beat louder than ever. It was so loud that it started to drum inside his mind. What sort of splash, 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 quote. Exclamation mark question mark quote. What the, hey, watch out. Water suddenly splashed across the port as figures surged up from the depths, leaping onto the dock. Once their silhouettes became clear, the faces of many changed as they realized they were all statues. Be careful, move back. Lazarus raised his hand and forced the people back as he stared at the statues. Though they didn't appear strong, he could still feel they'd pose a threat to quite a few present. What was happening? Splash, splash. This continued as more and more statues emerged, appearing from all sides, their presence not lacking many of the emissaries present. And as if the situation wasn't getting already bad enough, a thick fog started to shroud the entire area. Careful, where is this from? What's going on? Jophiel waved his hand to disperse the fog, but it was to his shock to see that he couldn't do it all. What? Eventually, Jophiel raised his head. It was also then that his gaze locked with that of the merchant as he stared at him with a thin, yet calm smile. That's when Jophiel started to feel them. Chills. 639. Quote. Get ready to depart. Lazarus's voice quietly echoed as the fog began to spread. Though his voice was calm, the gravity it contained was hard to miss. Splash, splash. At the same time, statues continued to emerge from deep within the water, climbing onto the port and onto the ship. Quote. Careful, watch out, clank. Sparks flew as the sound of metal clashing against stone echoed. The situation reversed within just a few seconds as Lazarus, the one responsible for all of this, looked in Anne's direction. His gaze was hazy as he looked at her, occasionally flickering between clarity and haze. The sight left her slightly unsettled. While I do have faith in your ability to take on the Luminarch in a one-on-one situation, this is still the Temple's land. More reinforcements will be coming soon. The best course of action for us is to leave this place as soon as possible. Quote. I am of the same opinion. Anne readily agreed, then turned with a cold glare toward those who had betrayed her. Their faces had gone pale beneath her gaze. Don't bother with them. She was just about to act when Lazarus stopped her. What? You'll end up wasting time. Lazarus's eyes turned even hazier as he looked towards the fog beneath. I need you to remain here to keep the Luminarch in check. I'll take care of the rest. He won't move if you don't move. Anne wanted to refute his words. She didn't like the feeling of being commanded. However, taking into account his words, this was indeed the best course of action. Her power was about the same as that of the Luminarch. If she moved, so would he. In that sense, she had to remain still and hope that the merchant would resolve the situation on the ship. But would he be able to? Anne clenched her teeth before mumbling. Quote. Fine. Anne understood that this wasn't the time for her to get upset over matters like this. She ignored her surging feelings and focused her attention on the distant Luminarch. Although she couldn't feel his presence, she knew he was still standing in the same exact spot he was previously in. Her eyes narrowed as her entire body tensed, ready to strike at any given second. Clank, clank. Meanwhile, the sound of fighting continued to echo. Lazarus stared at the scene and flicked his hand. Several threads shot up, attacking the spies planted by the luminarch. Shoo, shoo, his actions were quick and precise. Within seconds of him taking action, several spies were quickly disposed of as his eyes focused on a distant figure. He was fighting several spies, and he was somewhat familiar with them, having seen them with Anne. He was a tall and burly man who fought with 2 large hammers, handling several spies at once. Clank, sparks flew as he fought. He fought quite well with his hammers, dancing across the ship. It was just unfortunate that he was currently outnumbered. Taking several steps back, Arnold glared at the spies before him. Bastards. Fucking sellouts. He never got his words out before the people before him fell limply to the ground. Slowly turning his head, he saw Lazarus flick his hand back to retrieve his threads. How in the world? Step. Lazarus's step gently echoed as he flicked his hand once again, taking care of several emissaries who were trying to climb their way up the ship. His threads were fast, and with the addition of Almighty's illusions, nobody was able to react to them. He was like a god of death, calmly walking around the ship while killing anyone who stood in his way with a single flick of his hand. The scene didn't go unnoticed by Anne as her eyes shook. From the statues to the strange fog, and now this. Just how powerful was this merchant? I need you to take control of the ship and start moving it back. Lazarus calmly whispered to the stunned Arnold, who was still struggling to make sense of the situation. We don't have much time, so I need you to do it now. Yes. Snapping out of it, Arnold immediately got into action as he shouted. Retrieve the anchor. Retrieve the anchor. His loud voice echoed throughout the entire ship as the remaining crewmates followed his orders, moving towards where the anchor was, as a rattling sound soon followed. They're trying to leave. Stop them. The spies tried to stop them, but it was useless. Splash, splash. More and more statues appeared, climbing onto the boat and forming a long line that stopped the spies from moving forward. Rattle. What is happening? What is? It was also just as the anchor was being pulled up that Anaz got out from beneath, looking at the unfolding chaos with a look of shock. He quickly scanned the surroundings before he saw several emissaries from the Temple of Light heading in his direction. Attack him. What? Taken by surprise, Anaz took a step back. It was also then that he saw the tip of a blade slash right at him. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Anaz was just barely able to dodge the sword as he leaned back, his eyes tracing the tip of the sword. What are you doing? He just managed to distance himself before turning to look at the emissaries. At the same time, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a golden medallion, its surface engraved with the insignia of the sun. See, I'm with. Swoosh. Anaz's words were with the single slash of a sword as his pupils dilated, and he tapped the floor, just barely avoiding the sword again. What are you doing? His expression changed again as he looked at the emissaries. He pulled the medallion again. I'm on the same side as you. If you're from the same side as us, you should just die and make our lives easier. What? Stepping forward, the emissary raised his sword once again, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand the situation, do you? His voice was deep as he glanced past Anaz, noticing another emissary emerging behind Anaz. A smirk tugged at his lips. Whether you are part of the temple or not, you must die. This is a direct order from the Luminarch. You've been abandoned. Making eye contact with the other emissary, the two slashed down at the same time as Anaz looked at the scene with a blank look. The temple abandoning him? No, that wouldn't make sense. How could they abandon him? He was one of the most devout believers. Was it because he displayed his medallion? But he had to. If not, they would have attacked him. It wasn't like he revealed his position as team leader. Anaz's thoughts started to spiral as he forgot all about the situation. If. Thump. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Anaz's thoughts were broken by several thuds as he looked up to see Lazarus staring at him from a distance, his gaze hazy. The temple isn't on your side. Despite the chaos around and the fact that he wasn't close, his words still managed to reach Anaz. They're here to get you. But, get a grip. Right now, you're my assistant. Whether you can kill them or not is irrelevant. Just don't throw your life carelessly. Lazarus turned his head away shortly after as he flicked his hand, killing several emissaries at once. Anaz raised his hand, trying to reach for him and get some words out, but the moment he tried, he found that his voice was gone. He felt lost. Fight against the temple. He Couldn't. They were his everything, the meaning of his existence. How could he fight them? His life was theirs. If they really. My head. Anas clenched his head while scrambling back. He looked completely lost. Quote. The scene didn't go unnoticed by Lazarus as he quietly shook his head. He began to question whether he had made the right choice in selecting Anas. Still, he sensed there was likely more to Anas' behavior than he yet understood. There had to be a reason for his obsession with the temple. Lazarus was curious, but he understood that this wasn't the time for him to think about it. Human, I can't hold on for much longer. Upon hearing the Mind Hive's voice, Lazarus noticed the number of statues steadily dwindling as the emissaries and spies joined forces to take them down one by one. Get on the boat quickly. Quickly get on the boat before it moves. Quote. The anchors are up. Get the boat moving. Utter chaos unfolded on top and outside of the boat as many emissaries moved past the statues and jumped onto the boat, climbing their way up. The situation was starting to turn for the worse. Thankfully, only half of them leapt in the right direction, many ran the wrong way, and others plunged straight into the water. What's going on? Lazarus looked up, his gaze falling on the owl above before pulling his eyes away. Looks like the ship is finally starting to move. At that moment, he felt the ship finally begin to pull away from the dock. That was also the moment he felt a tremendous pressure bear down on the entire ship. Ookok, what's going? Several people slumped to the ground under the terrifying pressure. And as Lazarus slowly turned his head, his gaze fell on the radiant white figure that stood atop the fog, his finger floating in the sky as his glowing white eyes fell on Anne, who forced a smile. The Luminarch. He had finally made his move. Shit. With her grip over the whip tightening, Anne didn't waste a second. With her back tensed, she cracked her whip through the air, striking at the hovering Luminarch. A thunderous clap reverberated in the air as the whip streaked through the air, appearing right before the Luminarch. And then, bang! A thunderous sound reverberated throughout the surroundings as a shield formed in front of the Luminarch, a circular wave of pressurized wind spreading throughout the surroundings and forcing the ship to rock back and forth as large waves formed. Woo! Quote. Several people lost their balance in the terrifying wind. That was until, tap, Lazarus gently pressed his foot against the ground. Step of suppression. Immediately, the water calmed, and the ship settled. As the chaos settled and the waves stilled, the Luminarch appeared, unharmed as he glowed radiantly while suspended in the sky, looking like some sort of angel of judgment. His glowing eyes bore down on Lazarus, who remained unmoved, his gaze turning even hazier. Eventually, his lips pulled into a smirk, a dark membrane forming beneath him as it slowly enveloped the area around him, a stark contrast to the radiance from the Luminarch. All eyes fell on the two. Everything came to a standstill. 640. Quote. The water surrounding the ship rocked back and forth, waves rising and falling in uneven patterns. And yet, in spite of the large waves, the ship remained completely still. As though it were completely unaffected by the waves. All eyes were on the two figures that stared at each other. One hovered in the sky, glowing with a radiance that rivaled the distant white sun, while the other stood firmly on the ship, his gaze steady as a black film slowly unfurled from his body. Their momentum slowly built up with each passing second, the pressure coming out from the Luminarch slowly starting to expand and overtaking that of the merchant, who appeared indifferent to the losing momentum. But then, gotcha! A sharp crack split the air as the long tip of Anne's whip lashed out, stopping just short of the Luminarch. Bang! The shield around Jophiel rippled, faint cracks forming as he managed to block Anne's whip. He casually lowered his head to look at her as she looked back at him. She shook her head. For some reason, I'm getting pissed off. I should be the one you should be paying attention to. Quote. Right. Jophiel's eyes squinted. Indeed, realistically speaking, Anne was supposed to be the greatest threat as she was a Tier 8 user just like him. And yet, for some reason, staring at the merchant, Jophiel felt more unsettled. He was certainly weaker than Anne. That he didn't doubt. And yet, his calmness and tricks made him incredibly alert. As Jophiel looked at Anne, he started to wonder. Was she really the biggest threat? I don't really like that expression of yours. As if guessing his thoughts, Anne laughed with her teeth clenched. She felt quite a bit underestimated. Was all the reputation that she had built up over the years for nothing? The thought of being dismissed so casually infuriated her. Her hand rose once more, and her emerald eyes shone. Then, with a swift flick of her wrist, the whip snapped toward the Luminarch. Gotcha! The whip shot through the air once again, striking at the Luminarch in the air as he dismissed her attack, the shield around him rippling again. He was just about to speak when his face showed signs of change beneath his golden mask. Crack. The cracks that had been present just a moment prior started to expand rapidly. They moved fast, spreading around the entire shield before everything shattered. A glass-shattering sound echoed in the air as the Luminarch looked at the broken shards of what was once his shield. He blinked his eyes slowly before looking down at Anne and spotting the faint glow in her emerald eyes. Those eyes. It was those eyes of hers that were threatening. Jophiel had full confidence in his shield, a superior ranked spell known as Goddess Protection. It was an exceptionally powerful spell, capable of forming a barrier strong enough to withstand most attacks from opponents of the same tier, and even some from those above. For it to be broken like this, it could only be due to Anne's eyes. Not only did she spot the weakness of the shield, but it also enabled her to directly attack the same spot with unnerving precision. This was a bit of a problem, but not one that Jophiel found too troublesome. If her eyes are the problem, I just need to make sure she doesn't see anymore. He raised his hand and looked down. Then, with a simple snap of his fingers, his entire body glowed. Swoosh! A brilliant white light burst out from his body, covering the entire surroundings and even the dense fog beneath. "Och! My eyes!" Screams echoed throughout as the brilliant light that rivaled the sun's brilliance burst out from Jophiel's body. Celestial Grace. It was another superior ranked spell. One capable of blinding the nearby surroundings and turning those weaker blind. The screams beneath showed just how powerful the spell was, and as Jophiel looked down, he saw Anne's eyes turning red as she hastily looked away. Even she started to scream as she covered her face with her hand. Jophiel didn't miss the chance. Seizing the opening he had created, his body vanished from where he stood and reappeared in an instant before Anne. She didn't even have the time to react before he extended his hand, and a massive sword of light appeared. He looked at her directly and slashed down. Swoosh! A brilliant hue burst out as he slashed. His actions were quick and ruthless, leaving no room for Anne to dodge as she covered her eyes with her hand. But even though she couldn't see, it didn't mean that she was helpless. Groaning, she raised her whip and lashed out in the direction of Jophiel. She might not see, but that didn't mean she couldn't hear. Bang! The two weapons met, and a terrifying sound echoed. Help! From crew members to spies and emissaries, several people were thrown overboard as the moving ship began to lurch violently back and forth. The aftershock of the attack was simply that powerful. Right after blocking the attack, Anne took the chance to create some distance between her and the Luminarch before taking several deep and ragged breaths. Shit, he's really strong. Her eyes were still hurting, and her hand was numb. The situation was actually quite disadvantageous for her. However, it wasn't as though she had an option but to fight. It was either she died, or he died. She had no other option, and as her breathing started to stabilize, she raised her whip again, ready to strike once more. But just as she was about to do that, a certain hand pressed against her shoulder. "You can stop." Anne was stunned to see the merchant standing right behind her, his hazy eyes locked onto the distant Luminarch. "Stop. What?" Anne's brows furrowed tightly. "What do you mean, stop? If we don't, take a look around you." Lazarus pointed at their surroundings. Do you really think that the ship will be able to last if you two continue to fight like this?" It was only then that Anne became aware of her surroundings, spotting several of her crew members injured on the ground, while the ship itself bore visible damage across multiple sections. Shit! Anne's face fell when she noticed the situation. She had been so preoccupied with the fight that she forgot to take into account her ship and crew members. If she were to really continue the fight, then the ship would quickly sink. She couldn't afford to have that happen. This ship of hers, it was extremely valuable, but what other option do I have? I'm sure his goal is to destroy the ship so that we don't move away. Even if I try to take things away, he'll just stay here. He's also trying to kill us. It's not like, I understand. The merchant cut through her words, pulling his hand away and taking a step forward. That's why I'll take it from here. What, you? Anne made a weird expression while looking at the merchant. While it was true that he had shown several impressive things so far, she still didn't think he was that strong. He was significantly weaker than her and the Luminarch. What could he even do? Yes, me, but as opposed to her, the merchant looked completely calm as he settled his gaze over the distant Luminarch. Once again, their eyes locked. But as opposed to before, the merchant's eyes were clear. They were no longer hazy. And the change didn't go unnoticed by the luminarch as he raised his brow. Something about his current demeanor seemed different. It was almost as though an entirely different person had appeared. What? Julian's eyes closed. I might need to borrow some of your mental strength. This might be a little dangerous. It's alright, human. I understand the situation. I hope you succeed. Otherwise, neither one of us will survive. He was currently speaking to the hive mind. Listening to its words, his lips gently pulled up as he closed his eyes. He stood in silence, the world around him fading completely. Everything came to a standstill. Everything but the pain in his head as his lips began to tremble. At this very moment, his surroundings turned completely dark as he tuned out all the noise around him. He stood within the darkness, his mind drifting towards a certain past. A certain memory. Eventually, multiple white dots appeared around him. They surrounded the dark world. Like stars. Julian stared at the familiar sight. This was exactly how it was back then. Back when he caught a glimpse of the source. Though he still couldn't access it, he hadn't forgotten the experience. The way everything flowed together, and the feeling it left behind. He remembered everything, and gradually, he tried to replicate it. He tried to bring back that familiar feeling. Julian felt his mind prickle again. The pain grew sharper. He also felt his own consciousness starting to fade. However, he didn't care. He just focused on the sensation he had once felt. That deep and unfathomable sensation that made him feel as though he was completely in control of his body and mind. The more he delved into that feeling, the more his consciousness faded. But at the same time, his control deepened. He felt certain feelings boil within his mind. 6 different colored orbs appeared. They expanded into multiple ones, each one circling around him as he stared at them. He could feel something while staring at them. They were dangerous. There would be no going back the moment he tried to replicate the power. But this was what he had been looking for the entire time. He had to tap into it even though he wasn't ready. This was the path he had chosen. And so, Julian raised his head and looked around. He stared at the scene, took in the scene, and then, he opened his eyes. The world around him changed in that moment. The moment his eyes opened, he saw colors. Bright colors appeared within the bodies of every single person who was within his sight. In particular, his gaze fell on the luminarch in the distance. With sword in hand, he appeared to be preparing something, but Julian didn't care. His eyes were too focused on the multiple orbs within his chest. He could see a red orb within his chest. It was greater than the other orbs. Then, he also saw a purple orb. But it was relatively smaller than the rest. Green, too. Julian licked his lips before he raised his hand. Then, he pushed his hand up. The purple orb grew in size.